Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Yes, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. So on this day, President Trump is about to sign an executive order that would set in place the eventual shutdown of the U.S. Department of Education. And so I'm wondering what your thought is about this.
It's an interesting way to characterize it.
Well, how would you characterize it?
I would characterize it as, here shortly, we have yet again the lawless President of the United States seeking to commit yet another violation of law. And the reason that I say that is because the Department of Education, unlike DOGE, is a real department. That's number one. Number two, when I say that it's real, it was created by Congress. That means that no president, this one, Joe Biden or any other, would have ever had the ability to, with the swipe of their pen, decide that they were going to delete this entire agency. And so what he's about to do is break the law again. Some court will come in and tell him, no, Mr. President, just so you know, you're not allowed to do that, kind of like they had to do with birthright citizenship and so many other things that he's trying to just kind of write into law. He believes that he reigns supreme to the other co-equal branches of government and that he can do whatever he wants to. But getting to the point of your question and not critiquing your actual question, so sorry. You know, this is devastating. At the end of the day, they are trying to starve this agency and bring it to its knees one way or another. We know that prior to him even signing off on this, when they finally did nominate the wrestling CEO to become the secretary, she was tasked with trying to shut down the agency. That is what he told her. We know that as soon as she got in, she decided that she was going to get rid of 50% of the people that work for the Department of Education. And so while they may go through trying to shut it down by basically putting it into a malnourished state, you know, they're going to have to go through the courts, or they're going to just have to get the Republicans to say, okay, we're okay with signing off on getting rid of the Department of Education. Good luck with that one.
Let me ask you, because everything that's been written so far, and obviously what you're saying, Congress still has to vote to do this.
Yeah.
And in the Senate, they need 60 votes
Yeah.
to do it, right?
Yeah.
So how concerned are you about this?
I'm not very concerned about them being able to shut down the Department of Education legally, the lawful way, because of the filibuster in the Senate. Now, I say this on the heels of definitely a group of Senate Democrats letting us down as it relates to the continuing resolution that went through their chamber. I don't really see why or how they could agree to help the Republicans shut down the Department of Education. We're talking about starving children. So speaking of malnourishing anything, any child that is on the school lunch program, whether it's reduced or free lunch, that comes through the Department of Education. Anyone who has ever sent their kiddo off to school and they weren't independently wealthy, they most likely filled out the FAFSA. That is processed through the Department of Education. This is how students go about getting the funds that they need to pay for higher education. You know, when we look at those children of ours that are uniquely abled, I just had a little one in my office yesterday with her mom who's uniquely abled. So many of our uniquely abled kiddos, this is how they are afforded their educational opportunities as well. So it doesn't really make sense. I don't think that this is a partisan thing. This is evil versus good. This is right versus wrong.
The White House has said today that student loans, Title I funding for low income, students for disability, who have disabilities, et cetera, none of those programs is changing. They're still going to stay under the functions of the U.S. Department of Education for now. And they say that perhaps when it comes to loans, the Treasury Department would pick up that part of it. I know you've expressed concerns to the Secretary about the Office of Civil Rights, which is slated to close here in Dallas, and that may be picked up by the U.S. Justice Department. So what do you think about all this?
I think it's a bunch of malarkey.
So you see this as a total end of the program, period?
I do. I do.
And no money shifting to the states and letting the states handle it.
I absolutely do. I don't see any refuge for those that are benefiting from these programs right now. And think about this, Jack. We're talking about an administration that came in talking about they were going to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. And every time that they've actually done something that we know that they've done, because they've been very cagey about these alleged savings, every time they post something, it's inaccurate, right? And it gets corrected as soon as they post whatever it is that they allegedly were saving us from. But these are the same folks that did not understand the importance of the people that were overseeing and making sure that the bird flu hopefully would be eradicated. These are the same people that did not understand the importance of the people that were watching our nuclear stockpiles. So the idea that I'm now going to trust that somehow they're going to get this right, because what is the point in shutting down the Department of Education? Even if you were saying that I want to keep all these things intact, then why wouldn't you just say we're going to get rid of these portions of the Department of Education? Why would you see the need to go through costing us by going to court and all that kind of stuff to prove that you're wrong for doing the shutdown in the first place? This is the double talk that we've seen, because again, we know that when he ran for office, us Democrats kept saying he is going to implement Project 2025. What did Donald Trump say? He said, I don't know anything about Project 2025. I sat in a committee hearing, in a hearing that ended up going viral, where literally I mentioned that his name was mentioned 312 times in Project 2025. You want me to tell you what's in Project 2025? Shut down the Department of Education. And there is no, oh, but we want to do this for the uniquely abled students, or we want to do this for those kiddos that can't afford to eat. There's nothing like that. And I definitely, let's say, best case scenario, best case, oh, we're going to send it back to the states. You want me to tell you what the governor of this state did over the summer? When it came down to getting the funds so that kids could eat over the summer because now they weren't in school, guess who decided kids in Texas should go hungry? It was Governor Abbott. He was the one that didn't engage. Now,
the state has its own program though, right?
the state has their own program, but there were kids that were missing out on monies that they could have had for food.
From the federal
From the federal government, yes. And he was one of the few states that decided to do that. That doesn't make sense. So I don't trust that he's going to look out for these kids going forward. We also know, I mean, when it comes down to it, when we look at what happened to our kiddos in Uvalde, like, I'm sorry, but I don't trust these guys to be the ones to look out for the best interests of children. They have spent all their time talking about trans kids playing sports. That is what they've spent their time on. And the last time I checked, I don't even know that they have the numbers on that, right? Number one. Number two, I know that we haven't lost any child's life because of that. But we do have a real issue around guns in our schools. We do have a real issue around hunger in our schools. And when we're talking about our next generation, we know, not because somebody told us, but because of the data and the science, that in these itty bitty developing bodies, if they don't have the nutrition, then they are unable to get their lesson. And so I don't trust them, and I honestly don't think anybody should, because when I look at your track record, it is nothing that instills any confidence in me.
I want to ask you about another issue that got national headlines this week, and that's Congressman Brandon Gill from North Texas.
Yeah,
and
gotta love him.
His impeachment articles that he filed against Judge Boasberg in Washington, D.C., who tried to block the Trump order on deportation of the Venezuelans who the government identifies as members of Tren Aragua gang. So where are you on this? What was your reaction when you heard?
I actually did a video that we have not uploaded yet, and I said that he's suffering from pick-me syndrome. He clearly is trying to be noticed by this president, and so this is yet another failed Republican who just doesn't have a mind of his own. He just wants to be liked by Donald Trump. Here's the reality. When I spoke about this issue over the weekend, I talked about the fact that we could not trust that this administration would do right, because this administration has continually messed up, and they are, 60 days in? Not even that yet, right? And they continue to make these disastrous mistakes. I don't think they're mistakes. I think it's very intentional what they're doing. But at the end of the day, the idea that anyone should be given permission to violate a court order, no matter who you are, you don't have that right. That's just not what it is in America. And so what we have is we are seeing that the legislative branch has decided that they don't want to be co-equal. They want to be subservient, at least if they're Republicans. They want to be subservient to the executive branch. Right now, at least so far, the judiciary has held their own. Every time that Donald Trump and this administration has been challenged, we have won in court. The question is, are we really winning? Because at the end of the day, if you have a branch of government that says, I am going to ignore you because I am above you, then that is a problem. So really what Brandon should have been doing is going back to the basics of government and recognizing that if anybody has failed in this particular court case, it wasn't the judiciary who issued an order. It was Donald Trump and his administration that decided that they would knowingly and willfully violate that court order. And so this is laughable. I sit on the Judiciary Committee. And so if for some reason anything was to take place, it has to go through judiciary. So it will come through my committee. I will absolutely do everything that I can to talk about how ridiculous this is and try to give a very elementary education of the basics. Now, ultimately, do they have the votes to get it out of judiciary? And do they have a chairman in judiciary that would love to do something like this? Absolutely, right? They can do it. They can get the votes, they can get it out. And honestly, they can probably get the votes on the House floor to do the impeachment. But then we need a conviction. And that's where you need 2/3 of the Senate who will say, we will convict this judge of what? Knowing that Donald Trump would most likely cause more harm than good and put us into a bad situation because that is what's been revealed. Yes, we don't want bad guys. I'll scream it from the rooftop. I don't want bad guys from this country or any other country running around and terrorizing anyone in our communities, period, no matter who you are, right? But at the end of the day, you have an administration that continues to overreach. And so what we saw is that there are people that ended up on those planes that they're saying they didn't have a criminal record at all. And that is why you can't trust this administration. And that is why you need to go through due process, which is constitutionally guaranteed. You need to go through some kind of due process situation so that you can show that you've got the wrong person or whatever. Imagine the harm that's done, and imagine the type of legal liability that we may end up facing as a country, and our tax dollars may end up being taxed, essentially, because we may get sued. I fully anticipate there's going to be lawsuits because of what they did.
I want to ask you about another topic that you have really spoken out about. You touched on a little bit before about the continuing resolution that happened already. And you have spoken out against Senator Schumer.
Yeah.
As far as the leadership. And, you know, to hear Republicans describe it, they describe it, Democrats are in disarray, you know, they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Listen, I was describing this a little bit earlier, and I said that it is a blessing and a curse to be a Democrat. It is a blessing in the sense that we are most critical of ourselves. And this is why you get really some of the most qualified candidates running for office, because we will tear ourselves apart first. But it is also a curse in the sense that I understand that ultimately Trump and MAGA, they are the problem, right? They are. But that doesn't mean that we can't be better, right? And so we try to do both. And the Republican Party, they just take whoever they get. Like, it's a warm body. I don't even know if they care if it's a warm body. Like, they don't care who it is, right? Because that's the only reason we have a 34 count convicted felon. That would never happen in the Democratic Party. You know why? Because the Democrats would have torn that candidate apart in the first place. But the Republicans, they do not care. They care about their hateful mission. And whoever is willing to carry out that mission, that is what they're going to do. And so, you know, I'm going to be honest, though. When I critique, it's going to be a critique of whoever. And sometimes that means even people in my party.
Do you think it's time for new leadership in the Senate?
I think that I don't get a vote. And I think that while people may be frustrated across this country with Senator Schumer, none of us get a vote. We don't get a vote on that. They get a vote on whether or not Schumer goes back to the Senate in 4 years, but they don't get a vote on leadership. That's just not how it works. You know, I've talked to some donors that are trying to get very creative But I think that, it is a little bit reminiscent of what we saw happen to when Joe Biden was taken down. And there were a lot of elected members of Congress that decided that they wanted to play in that conversation. So it'll be interesting to see how many senators decide that they want to start engaging in that conversation. I don't get a vote on the Senate side, but if there ends up being enough senators that start saying, hey, we may need new leadership, then there may end up being a trend from some other electeds as well as donors that may end up applying pressure. But at the end of the day, I don't know who even wants that job. It's a tough job to have right now, right? And so it's not just about getting somebody out. It's like, well, who wants it? Like, who feels like they may be able to lead in this moment? And I need the public to understand that when you are in leadership in the House or the Senate, the biggest role that you have is your ability to raise money. So you have to raise money, because you've got to try to do everything that you can to take power, right? You've got to we need to flip the House and flip the Senate. And so there are some people that, yes, they may want to speak out. They may want to be opposition for Trump right now, but they don't want to have to deal with traveling the country incessantly, asking for dollars and trying to raise and trying to find the right candidates in the right states to be able to win and flip some of those seats. There's more than just the opposition side of this. And I don't know the Senate caucus like that, but I'm guessing that.
Are you part of that effort in the House?
Well, there's no effort in the House. I mean, we've said that we disagree with him, and I
But as
do
far as
believe-
going around the country looking for candidates, flipping
absolutely.
the House,
yeah,
et cetera.
Yeah. No, I'm constantly traveling and speaking and being asked to do various things. As it relates to candidates, usually candidates are calling me. So I've not sourced many candidates here recently.
But
not
you're
for
getting
this
calls.
Yeah, I'll get calls.
From people across the country or here in
From
Texas?
From people across the country, but right now the majority of my calls are coming from down in Houston, right now for the
because
special election. Yeah.
Congressman Sylvester Turner's
Yeah.
seat. Yeah. Let me ask you about reconciliation.
Yeah.
And the Trump administration is pushing members of the Republicans very hard to get one big bill passed. Republicans want to extend the tax cuts from 2017. They say if they are not extended and made permanent, everybody's taxes are going to go up. Your thoughts?
Okay, so I do want to be clear. They want to take what happened in 2017 and double down. So it's not just like, oh, we're going to continue on. It is actually that they want to go even further, okay? So one of the things that...
I'm sorry, are you talking about...
on the tax cuts.
Right, but are you talking about President Trump saying no tax on tips, no tax on
No,
Social
I'm
Security,
talking
no
about,
tax on overtime?
I'm talking about for the 1%ers. Those are the only people that really benefited. I'm not going to say they're the only ones that benefited from 2017. But the top earners is how I will phrase it.
Okay.
The top earners are the ones that benefited the most from the 2017 tax cuts. And now they want to basically give them even bigger benefits, is the way that I would characterize it. Because what we're doing is there's 4.5 trillion.
Yes.
I want to say is
Yes,
the
in
number.
tax cuts, that's right.
And so the issues that we have is number one. We know, let me make it really simple because I know people are going to watch this. When it comes down to the money that we have in our own homes, right? So I'm a single woman and I've got my salary. So that's how much money I've got coming in. That's how much I've got to work with. So when I'm deciding on my bills and what they're going to look like, how big my house is, whether or not I have a car note, those things, I am basing that on my one salary. Now, let's say I go and get married and now there's another additional income that I have. And so now it's like, oh, well, you can afford a bigger house. You can afford maybe a bigger car, that kind of thing. So the house and the car in this circumstance is our Social Security. It's Medicaid, it's Medicare. You can afford those things when you say, you know what, let's bring in a little bit of additional income. Let's go ahead and get somebody else in on this party. Well, what we're having is right now, they're saying, no, those top earners, we don't want you to have to pay anything. And the only way that we can pay for that so that you don't have to pay your, what I would consider to be fair share, is if we give up our Social Security, if we give up our Medicaid, if we give up our Medicare.
I haven't seen any of that. I mean, the president has said very clearly he's not cutting Social Security, he's not cutting Medicare. And as far as Medicaid, from what Republicans tell me, they're not cutting benefits to pregnant women, poor women, disabled, but they want able-bodied people to get back to work and get off of that. So what's your reaction to that?
That's probably the only acceptable way to say it. So
But that's
I'm sure
what
that
they've
that's,
said.
I'm sure that that's,
You're not buying it, essentially.
No, I'm not. I mean, and it's not even just, you don't have to believe what I say. Look at the House budget resolution that passed. The House budget resolution that passed was all about determining where these cuts were going to come from. So the Republicans kept going out saying, listen, they keep talking about Medicaid and that we're going to cut Medicaid, but there was no mention of Medicaid in the budget resolution. And there wasn't. They are telling the truth about that. But what they are being deceitful about is they said from Energy and Commerce, which is one of our committees, they said you have to find 880. I think it's 880.
That's correct.
There is nowhere else to find it. So I don't get it. Like, the math doesn't math for me. If there's nowhere else to find it but in Medicaid, then yeah, you can do your double talk and say that you're not going to do it. But the reality is that you all voted for the bill to do it. I mean, the budget office told us like where it would come from. So we know, same thing when it comes to SNAP benefits. They said find $240 billion somewhere within agriculture. The only place that you can pull it from is from SNAP benefits. You have to take them. So this isn't us just doing things to be partisan. I mean, at the end of the day, it either is or isn't going to happen. So one of us is telling the truth and one of us is not. But based on the votes that they have taken and the reason that we have voted against some of this stuff is because of these cuts. And I can tell you, Jack, we were on the floor and they held us on the floor for an hour because we had our first vote and the next vote. They did not know if they were going to have the votes. So they held us there. The last I heard is that Donald Trump was on the phone with Victoria Sparks of Indiana and trying to convince her to vote for the House budget resolution. And so next thing you know, they said, never mind, we're canceling the next vote, and they let us go. So we then leave. Within about 15 minutes, they call us back and said, hey, we've got to do this vote. So I'm like, oh, they're trying to catch us to where we're not there so that they can actually pass it. Well, ultimately, they ended up getting the votes. I guess he called enough people. But these are people, like when you're talking about a rural state like Indiana, she understands what's about to happen to her constituents. This is going to hit rural America, urban America again. This is right versus wrong, good versus evil. This is not a partisan issue. No, you heard his right hand say, what did he say about Social Security? I know you know. I know I'm not supposed to ask you a question, but I know you know the answer. What Elon said was that Social Security was nothing but a Ponzi scheme. Does that sound like someone who is fond of the idea of Social Security, or is this someone who is trying to tarnish what Social Security is as they get ready to try to take it out?
So you're expecting that. That's what you think is going to happen.
I think, not even think, the chair of the budget committee in the House said this is a good start, but we are going after Social Security next. That's what came out of his mouth. And he is the chair. He's a Republican chair in the House. You can go and run the tape up. Nobody has to believe me. C-SPAN is available. You can go and find it, right? So I think that they are going to get some pushback. I think that's why Republicans are not wanting to do their town halls, because they are starting to find out, just like they have gone after our veterans. You know, this used to be the party of supporting veterans. And who's losing their jobs in the federal government? So many veterans, because about a third of our workforce, they are veterans, right? Who is it that they went after in the CR? They cut approximately, I don't remember the number now, but there was money for the burn pits. They did not make sure that that money for those that actually suffered from and the legislation had been passed, that money is gone. They did not include that money in this continuing resolution. That was cut out. But you know what did happen? Department of Defense ended up with more money. So they gave more money to Department of Defense that has not been able to pass a budget or pass a clean audit in the last 6 or 7 audits, but they then took money away from our veterans. And you know who gets their contracts from Department of Defense? Okay, I'll help you out. It's Elon. Elon, that is where he gets the vast majority of his contracts from the federal government. So somehow we found more money to put on the defense side of the ledger, but at the same time, those that have housing vouchers, we won't have the money for at least 32,000 existent housing vouchers. Now, mind you, this isn't taking into consideration all the people that are losing their jobs, whether they're private or government employees, that now will need to get some type of housing subsidy. It won't be there because the people that already have subsidies are losing it.
Let me ask you about tariffs. We saw the markets really take a jolt in the last couple of weeks. What's your thought on that as far as the reciprocal tariffs going into effect, at least as of right now, April 2nd, and we've seen some other tariffs already in effect and the reactions from people. The president has said ultimately he wants manufacturing to move back into the United States. What's your take?
I will say this at least, is that he actually did campaign on tariffs. So I will say that. I mean, you know, all the other stuff that is straight out of Project 2025 that he did not campaign on that. And so I understand why people were confused and concerned and they were like, this isn't what I voted for. But honestly, if you voted for him and you take issue with the tariffs, he did at least campaign on that. So I will give him that much, that he was talking about the tariffs. I don't think he knows what he's doing, but I don't think that that's a surprise for anybody that I believe that. And honestly, you don't have to believe me when I say that he's a failure at this. Again, look at the markets. The markets have been crashing out. 401ks are obviously taking a dip right now. And frankly, we've not even yet seen how bad the increases are going to be. We've not gotten there yet, right? But we know that cost overall, since he's sworn into office, have kind of crept up. People have been talking about the inflation and how the inflation rate has actually crept up as well. And so
I thought it actually cooled from the last month.
From the last month, but overall, at the rate that we were finally getting down to when Biden was leaving, as soon as he got in, that rate ended up going, the rate of inflation. Let me make sure I'm saying it that way. And so, yes, again, he's only been in 60 days. And this is already what you're doing. But I will say that, you know, I've tried to explain tariffs. I do think that people, even when he was campaigning, some were kind of confused about it. They thought that it would be taxes on somebody else. They didn't realize that basically the money, the cost gets passed on to us. Also, I don't think that there was ever a conversation around, because I don't remember him attacking our friends on the tariffs when he was campaigning. There was a lot of talk about China, and I think that people are kind of like, okay, well, that's fine, it's China, right? But I don't think that he ever campaigned saying, hey, our friends to the north and our friends to the south, we're going to end up in a trade war with them. I don't recall that part of his campaigning. And I think people are just now learning things like, oh, if you are already complaining about the cost of housing, do you know how much lumber and how much steel we get from Canada? Well, now you're finding out, right? Because they are one of our great trade partners on that stuff, and we need that for building. Even when it comes to energy, when Canada threatened to cut off energy, you know how many people probably didn't know that was something that they didn't know, right? So he did campaign on it, but was it full transparency and were people fully aware? No. And the idea of, you know, making enemies of our friends while making friends with our enemies is absolutely insane and wild. And as it relates to the underlying kind of alleged purpose of bringing manufacturing back, the Infrastructure Act did that. The Chips and Science Act was doing that. You know what he's trying to do? He's trying to gut the funding under both of those bills. He wants to pull back and rein in the monies that was for that. The reason that, you know, places like Ohio in a very small town in Ohio, they're getting a new chips manufacturing site. Well, that's thanks to Joe Biden. Same thing here in the state of Texas. We ended up benefiting and getting a new chips manufacturing site here in Texas. And listen, we've got some chips manufacturing sites. We've got one in the district, actually. And so, but literally a large new installation was coming in. And for people that don't understand the importance of chips, and it was my predecessor that led the way on this, as she was the chair of the Science and Technology Committee at the time, is when we went through COVID and we saw like how much TVs were and all kinds of stuff, and we were having these supply chain issues because we were getting so much out of China. And to be fair, the vast majority of our chips in the world, if there's one place that we get them from, is Taiwan, right? And so Taiwan is kind of like, that is like where they've kind of cornered themselves as far as a market is concerned, even though chips are a Texas thing for sure. And so the idea was, let's at least diversify, let's open this up and create jobs, right? So if we ever end up in another one of these supply chain issues, we won't have this issue where we don't have new cars coming out because we don't have enough chips, or we don't have the new there was so much that we couldn't get, or the prices spiked because we couldn't get them. And a lot of it is because everything that we have has a chip, except for your glasses. It's like the only thing that doesn't have a chip. Everything else has a chip. So I think that there's a lot of ways to figure out where we could play in the supply chain and where we could be experts. And I think it was great that we went with chips because we know the history of chips in this country. So I thought that that was really smart. But there's a lot of other things that we could be doing. We could figure out another space that's a niche area for us. For instance, when we think about farming in the state of Texas, cotton is something that we do really big. We do everything in agriculture big in Texas. But I didn't know until I was on the ag committee that we literally take kind of this raw cotton and then we send it out of the country to get it processed, and then we bring it back in. Well, what if we just did it all here? Maybe that would work. Maybe that's something that we could corner, right? But I think that it's a matter of kind of listening and even talking to our farmers and figuring out, if we are going to go to alternative fuel sources, like what does that look like? Is there something that they could like raise to do this? I think that there's a lot of things. I think that when we even talk about green energy and what that looks like, there's a lot of new jobs to be created. And I know that people probably are like, oh God, she's being a lefty right now. But most people don't know that in the state of Texas, we, again, do everything bigger, including all energy. We have the largest wind farms in the entire country right here in Texas. So we do all big energy, not just the dirty energy. We do the clean energy as well. And I think that that's what you saw in the previous administration, was this forward-thinking mindset of trying to figure out what is futuristic, trying to make sure that they can encourage STEM education and things like that. Instead, now you have an administration that doesn't value education and wants to set us back and wants all these other countries to zoom ahead of us as relates to what it is that we're learning, what it is that we're creating. And frankly, the world has historically relied on us to lead. That is why we were able to lead with the COVID vaccines, because we have been working on technology. We were forward thinking. And right now we have some people that are dead set on taking us back into the, I used to say the pre-civil rights, and now it feels like the 1800s.
Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the conversation.